Hello and welcome to Chapter 14, Lesson 3, where we talk about life today in Australia and New Zealand. We're going to try to make this one a little bit shorter than some of our other videos as we kind of move through this here. There we can kind of see the population map of Australia and New Zealand, and particularly pay attention to this interior section right in here of Australia. You know, the population is going to be less than 2.5 people per square mile, which means it's not very populated. Not very many people live here. You can see that color really increases a lot around the coastlines. Cities of Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne, Canberra, Sydney, Brisbane. Those are some of the larger cities. Are we seeing that same trend in New Zealand? Maybe a little bit, towards around the coast, but not nearly as much. I mean, much of New Zealand is fairly mountainous. Most of Australia and New Zealand are European in ancestry. So we see 92% in Australia and 57% in New Zealand. But the country is very diverse. There's people that come from Asia. There's Aboriginal people in Australia, and then Asian people, Maori people in New Zealand. Christianity is the most common religion, not too surprising since, it was heavily influenced by England, but there's other religions like Buddhism, Islam, and Hinduism, and obviously the native religions of both the Maori and the Aboriginal people. About a third of the people describe themselves as non-religious. That's definitely a trend among more modern countries, United States included, a lot of Europe as well. English is the official language in both New Zealand and Australia. There are some other official languages there in New Zealand, including native languages. New Zealand does have sign language for people that are deaf. That became an official language in 2006. I think this is where we can kind of see the Aboriginal languages. So we're not going to watch that right now. A lot of just more modern lifestyle that would be very similar to American or European countries, from such things as cars that are driven, activities, sports like rugby is popular, and so is football, but there's other things. There's a major tennis tournament every year in Australia. They're playing rugby. Rugby is, I don't know if I could tell you how you really play rugby. It's like a cross between soccer and football, kind of. There is tackling. It's a pretty aggressive game. And then obviously soccer we kind of know about here. This is cricket, another popular game, kind of similar to baseball, because they play with a paddle. Surfing is a popular sport. We talked about that when we covered the Great Barrier Reef. And then I already mentioned this, the human populations are unevenly distributed. They're mostly around urban areas, around the coast. Approximately 89% of Australians live in cities. This picture here is of the Sydney Opera House. We're going to talk about that in class. It's one of the most famous landmarks in Australia. It's supposed to look like waves, like the peak of waves. So it's a very famous landmark in the Sydney Harbour. In the rural sections, the outback, there is a lot of farming that happens, particularly raising of sheep and cattle. Sometimes this area of the outback is called the bush. In New Zealand, predominantly sheep raising. It is mountainous. You can see the mountains in the background there. Is a popular thing done there as well. See if there's anything here I want to really cover. Australian and English are different. So people that are English from Great Britain use maybe different terminology than people that are Australian called Aussies. We already talked about the soldiers that served in World War I and World War II, some in class. She talks about more kind of the modern technology and the internet that they have. I think a lot of students that are in the bush have to take and do kind of school online, like we're seeing here, not just because of COVID or anything like that. Definitely, they've tried to preserve and protect some of the cultures of the Aboriginal and the Maori people. That's a trend even in American culture with not letting native languages die out and their cultures and their traditions. This instrument is called a didgeridoo. You probably heard it before. It has like a long kind of like tube sound to it. So it's a popular instrument. Here's kind of some of the dancing that's happening in this picture. This shows the resources. And so Australia, it's a large area, so it produces lots of different things. We see petroleum on the list, natural gas, fishing around the coastlines. Tourism is also really, really big and important. So we see here that they're, have coal and iron ore. We've already talked about the farmland and trees. Here's what the wool that comes from the sheep. So that's a major thing. Because it's near the Ring of Fire, there are volcanic activity, and there is, so they can use that to naturally heat house through geothermal. It's kind of industrialized in New Zealand in recent years. Both countries, I think, really do have a fairly strong economy and pretty modern. This just talks about the concern to protecting the rights of the Aboriginal people and the Maori people in New Zealand. So there's been lawsuits that have sparked controversy. So you see here kind of some protesting going on there. And this is again about the Maori and protecting their rights as well. There's been wildfires in Australia because it does get very dry. And then we've talked about the threats facing the Great Barrier Reef as well. So lots about protecting the land. Here we can see this is kind of like what you would see in Yellowstone National Park here in our own country, geysers that comes from that same geological activity. And then low death rates, which is a good thing. People are living longer, but then low birth rates. People are not having as many children, probably because of emphasis on getting more education and, advancing a career, which is kind of creating interesting dynamics in the economy that are kind of an issue. So, kind of just a general review here, and we'll wrap this up. About 92% of Australians are of European descent. They're having that low birth rate and low death rate. There's 3 official languages in New Zealand: English, Maori, and New Zealand Sign Language. Also, Australia has English as an official language. The majority of Australians and New Zealanders live in urban areas. These are kind of small areas. Tikanga, which is the Maori customs and traditions, has passed down through generations. In the last 2 decades, New Zealand's economy has changed from a farm-based economy to one that relies more on industry. So that will wrap up lesson 3. Thank you for watching.